the death throes of Japan. It is remarkable that the Japanese market has shown recent signs of recovery, but it remains, up and down, up and down. We are predicting here that Japan will collapse catastrophically, like the Soviet Union, and for exactly the same reasons. Now, Japan is a democracy, has been since the Second World War, over 60 years now, and the Soviet Union, after 70 years of its existence as a communist state, collapsed. And most people thought that this was the result of a centralized economy, a failed government administrative system, and indeed that system is a factor, a major factor in the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the engine driving it underneath is the remarkable depredations and decline and collapse of the Russian population. Now, in Japan we have a case of a population declining with almost similar rates of depredation and decline, absolute decline, with very little immigration, and very little immigration in Russia as well. But that just makes the case clearer to illustrate, for we have a new matter to discuss here in relationship to the West. And of course Japan has been considered part of the First World, part of the West, if you like. So this is the first nation of the West that will catastrophically collapse. Korea has suffered somewhat, Argentina, and various other nations. Greece at the moment is collapsing rather majorly, and the reason for it is that if you have a population skirt for 20 years, you can sell into that skirt virtually without competition. There's external competition, but within your own borders, within your own legislative economic framework, you can sell very readily, in terms of distribution networks and current structures even, sell into that burgeoning population and support a small tube of older ones and infrastructure for an adult economy. Now, if you have a column, you have the problem of there are not enough young ones to pay the taxes to pay for the old ones, the ever-increasing numbers of old ones. So even by that mechanism, one must skirtify. Just by making the column wider through immigration doesn't solve the problem. You need the skirt to sell into. You have more taxpayers to pay for the a thin layer. It's the ratio of oncoming economically active persons to the system you're wanting to support, especially the top system, the sick, the elderly, and so on and so forth. The only way Western or advanced economies of any kind can support these things is through a population skirt, to have a vast number of people coming on in the future. That is your future, in fact. Children are our future. So to save the catastrophic situation from occurring, or when you approach a crisis, you must immediately move to the most voracious, energetic, dynamic, pro-natalist policies possible. You cannot have with an I, natalist policies. You must have pro-natalist policies. Now, this is not, nothing to do with Hitler's Germany or anything like that. This is not cannon fodder. Hitler's children were only 12 years of age when the war finished. They were of no good use to him in any economic or military capacity. I mean, he did have young soldiers, but they were 14 and 15. They belonged to a government and a generation before him. So it's got nothing to do with that. You must grow to grow. You've got to grow people to grow. You cannot just use innovation, or though the more people you have, the more innovation you'll have. You have a greater pool of talent, of brains upon the earth, and so on. So it's very important to have increased population. Japan will collapse either this week, next month, a few months from now. It cannot last long, possibly next year, but it will not last terribly long. I would be amazed if it lasted 2, 3, 4, 5 more years. It may do. One hopes it does, and that it has time to rectify this matter in some way, to offer a beacon of hope on the horizon, that they do move to a fertile position. It is the only way forward. And that's the reason. You cannot sell to people who don't exist. And exporting, is what all the nations are doing, and many other nations are in that boat. Be the first on your block to rise up out of the situation and create a future within your control, within your borders, in your country. Otherwise, the Western nations will collapse also. There are other factors too, in that if you have a large majority population within a country that does not exhibit the skirt but just the column, it's as if you're in a country that entirely has a column and not a skirt. So if your major population, your 60% population, is lacking a skirt, you'll have the same problems, a little bit more moderate perhaps. If you have 2 or 3 major populations making up your overall population, but their overall thing is lacking a skirt, you've had it. You will collapse. Now, why has the Western nations lasted so long since the Advent? We can put a date, the late 60s, the early 70s, to the Advent, the start, the beginning of this population stuff. And that is contraception, abortion, sterilisation, and the advocacy of non-reproductive lifestyles like fornication, homosexuality, and so on, androgyny, etc. All these philosophies, the green movement, the feminist movement, and so on, all these philosophies